She was just cleaning weapons, until a sniper challenged her to a 3,800-meter shot. Nobody noticed her at first. That was the point. She moved through the armory the same way she always did, quiet, precise, invisible. Her hands worked automatically, breaking down each rifle with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of doing the same thing over and over again. She was not a soldier in the way people imagined soldiers. She did not carry orders into battle. She did not lead men across open ground. She sat behind concrete walls, under fluorescent lights, cleaning barrels and checking springs and making sure that every weapon in that room was ready for someone else to use. Her name was Corporal Myra Hale. She was 26 years old, and almost no one in that base knew what she was actually capable of. She had grown up in a small town in the mountains of eastern Montana, where her father had taught her to shoot before she could ride a bicycle. Not because he was preparing her for war, he never imagined that, but because it was what people did out there. You learned to shoot the way you learned to drive. It was practical. It was part of the landscape. By the time she was 12, she could hit a tin can at 300 meters with her father's old hunting rifle. By the time she was 16, she was shooting at distances that made grown men stop and stare. But when she joined the military at 19, something strange happened. The Army looked at her test scores, looked at her physical profile, looked at the checklist of boxes she fit into and put her in the armory. Not on the range, not in a sniper program, in the armory. She was good with her hands. She was methodical. She was detail-oriented. The paperwork said she was perfect for weapons maintenance. And so that is where she stayed. For 7 years, Myra Hale cleaned guns that other people fired. She never complained about it out loud. But inside, there was always something sitting quietly at the back of her chest, a feeling she could not quite name. It was not bitterness exactly. It was more like a question that never got answered. She would handle a rifle, check its scope, adjust its tension, and somewhere in the back of her mind she would see the shot she would have taken with it. The exact angle, the wind correction, the breath control. She saw it all in one clean flash, and then she set the gun down and moved to the next one. The base where she was stationed in the autumn of that year was a forward operating post near the edge of a high desert plateau. It was the kind of place that existed in between things, not quite at the front, not quite behind the lines. The landscape around it was open and brutal, all flat stone and sharp wind and distances that played tricks on your eyes. Mountains sat on the horizon like something out of a dream. Everything felt very far away. It was on a Thursday morning, around 9 o'clock, when Staff Sergeant Dirk Vaughn walked into the armory. Vaughn was not like the other sergeants. He was older, quieter, and had the kind of stillness about him that men usually develop after spending too much time in high-pressure situations. He had been one of the Army's top-ranked marksmen for nearly a decade before a knee injury pulled him partially off active field duty. Now he ran the base's long-range training program. He was precise in everything, in how he spoke, in how he moved, in what he paid attention to. He walked past the rows of rifles without looking at them. He was looking at Myra. She did not notice him at first. She was focused on a scope she was realigning, her eye pressed close, making tiny adjustments with a tool that was not much bigger than a pen. Her concentration was total. The rest of the world simply did not exist when she was doing this. Vaughn watched her for almost 2 full minutes before she finally looked up. "Hale," he said, not a question, just her name. "Sergeant," she replied. She set the scope down carefully. He looked at her hands, then at the scope, then back at her. "You did the field calibrations on the M24s last week," he said. "Yes, Sergeant." "Who taught you the mil-dot correction method you used?" She paused. "Nobody. I read the technical manual and worked it out." Something shifted very slightly in his expression. "Come with me," he said, and he turned and walked out of the armory without waiting for her to respond. Myra set down her tools, wiped her hands on a cloth, and followed him. She did not know it yet. She had no way of knowing. But that quiet Thursday morning in that dusty armory at the edge of nowhere was the last ordinary day of her life. Vaughn took her to the range. Not the standard range where soldiers did their quarterly qualifications, the short one with the numbered targets at fixed distances and the timer that beeped when your session was done. He took her to the long range, the one that stretched out past the wire fence and into the flat desert floor beyond the base, where the wind moved differently, and the heat shimmer rose off the ground in waves, and the targets at the far end were nothing more than small dark shapes that most people could not even see without a scope. Myra had walked past the entrance to this range 100 times. She had never been inside it. There were 2 other men already there when they arrived, both snipers, both senior, both looking at her with the flat, unreadable expression that experienced soldiers use when they are withholding judgment. Their names were Specialist Acaffer and Warrant Officer Brecht. Acaffer was compact and quick-eyed. Brecht was tall, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of permanent squint that comes from spending decades behind a scope. Vaughn said nothing by way of introduction. He simply pointed at the position at the far left of the firing line and said, "Set up there." "I don't have a rifle," Myra said. Vaughn reached behind him and handed her one without a word. It was an Accuracy International chassis rifle, chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum. She recognized it immediately. She had cleaned this exact model dozens of times. She knew its weight, its trigger pull, the specific way the bolt cycled when it was properly lubricated. She had never fired one. She took it from him and carried it to the position. While she was setting up, she heard Brecht say something quietly to Acaffer. She did not catch the words, but she caught the tone. It was the tone of a man who expected to be mildly entertained by something that was not going to impress him. Myra lay down behind the rifle. The targets were at 5 different distances, marked with flags at each position. The closest was at 800 meters. The farthest was at 1,800 meters. These were already serious distances. Most trained soldiers could not hit consistently at these ranges. Even among snipers, 1,800 meters required a specific set of skills and a lot of controlled conditions. "Wind is coming from the northwest," Vaughn said. 7 to 9 kilometers per hour. Temperature is 31 degrees. Elevation here is about 1,400 meters above sea level. He was giving her the data. He was not telling her what to do with it. Myra took it all in. She had spent years studying ballistics, not because anyone asked her to, but because she found it genuinely fascinating. The physics of a bullet in motion was a kind of puzzle, and she had always loved puzzles. She had read every technical manual she could find. She had run calculations in her spare time. She had never had a target to test them on. Until now. She made her adjustments. She settled her breathing. She lined up on the first target, 800 meters, and fired. The shot broke cleanly. She heard the distant sound of metal hitting metal almost a full second later. She had hit center mass. She moved to the second target, 1,200 meters. She adjusted, fired, hit. The third, 1,500 meters. She paused slightly longer, accounted for the crosswind that was pulling fractionally left, and fired. The flag at the target position moved. Hit. She felt Brecht shift his position behind her. She did not look back. The fourth target was at 1,800 meters. This was the edge of what most certified snipers would attempt in real conditions. She spent 15 seconds making her adjustments. She controlled her breathing down to something very slow and very steady. She fired. Hit. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Vaughn spoke. "Hale, you have any formal sniper training?" "No, Sergeant." "Any informal training, a course, a mentor?" "No." Another silence. Brecht stepped up beside her and looked through a spotter scope at the 4 targets. She heard him exhale very slowly. "All 4, he said. She went 4 for 4. Vaughn looked at her for a long moment. She could not read his expression. It was careful in a way that felt deliberate, like he was thinking something through before he allowed himself to say it. Then he crouched down to her level and looked at her directly. "There is something I need to tell you," he said. "And I need you to understand that what I'm about to say is not a test, and it is not a drill, and I am not asking you to do anything you are not prepared to do." Myra waited. "There is a situation developing approximately 100 kilometers north of here," he said. "It has been developing for about 3 weeks. 2 days ago, it moved into a phase where the standard approaches are not going to work." He paused. "There is a target, and there is a distance, and the men who are supposed to take this shot are not in a position to do it right now." She looked at him. "What is the distance?" He met her eyes. 3,800 meters. The number landed in the air between them like something physical. 3,800 meters, nearly 2.5 miles. A distance so extreme that most professional snipers would say it was impossible under field conditions. The world record for a confirmed sniper shot had been broken and re-broken over the years, but those were controlled situations with perfect equipment and ideal conditions. What Vaughn was describing was not a range. It was not a record attempt. It was a real target, a real mission, with real consequences. Myra said nothing for a moment. She looked out across the range at the small metal shapes in the distance. She thought about the calculations involved. The drop over that distance would be enormous. A bullet in free fall for over 3 seconds before it arrived. The wind correction at that range became almost exponential. The slightest variation in atmospheric pressure could pull a shot by meters. At 3,800 meters, you were not shooting at where a target was. You were shooting at where physics said it would be by the time your bullet got there. "When?" she said. 48 hours, Vaughn said. She lay back behind the rifle and looked downrange. The last target, the one at 1,800 meters, was just barely visible in the heat shimmer. She thought about a target at more than twice that distance, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt ready. The next 48 hours were unlike anything Myra Hale had ever experienced. She did not sleep, not because she was told not to, but because she genuinely could not. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind went straight to the numbers. Drop rate, wind drift, spin drift caused by the bullet's own rotation over such a massive distance. Coriolis effect. At nearly 4 kilometers, the rotation of the Earth itself becomes a factor you cannot ignore. She lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling and ran the calculations over and over again, checking them against each other, looking for the point where she had made an error. She did not find one, but that did not make her feel better. It just meant she had not found it yet. Vaughn had given her a full briefing the afternoon after the range session. He had shown her satellite imagery of the location, a high ridge approximately 112 kilometers to the north, which sat above a valley where a specific individual had been operating out of for the past 3 weeks. This individual was responsible for coordinating a series of attacks on supply convoys that had cost the lives of 11 soldiers. He never stayed in the same place for more than a few hours. He had evaded 2 previous attempts to neutralize him. His security detail was large, and he always stayed well back from any exposed position. Except in the mornings. Every morning between 6 and 6:30, he walked out onto a specific section of the ridge. They did not know why. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was ritual, maybe he simply liked the view. But the intelligence confirmed it. 14 consecutive days of the same behavior, give or take a few minutes. He stood at that spot in the open for approximately 4 to 7 minutes, and then he went back inside. That window was the only shot they had. The problem was the distance. From the one stable firing position that provided a clear line of sight, a low rocky outcrop on the opposite side of the valley, the range to the target was 3,847 meters, nearly 4 kilometers. It was, as far as anyone on the base knew, beyond the reliable range of any sniper currently operating in the field. Brecht had done the math independently. He did not say it directly, but Myra understood from how he spoke about it that he had concluded it was not a feasible shot. Not under field conditions. Not without more preparation time, better equipment, better atmospheric data. Not with enough certainty to justify the mission. And yet Vaughn was standing in front of her, asking. She asked him why, directly without softening it. Why me? You have certified long-range shooters here. Brecht has more experience than I've had years of service. Vaughn looked at her for a moment before answering. Brecht looked at that shot and told me the variables were too uncertain. He is not wrong, but he is also thinking about it the way you think about a problem you are trying to solve with the tools you have. He paused. You thought about it differently. On that range this morning, you were not solving a problem. You were following something. She did not have a response to that. I'm not sending you because you're expendable, he said. I'm sending you because I think you can do it. And I want to know if you think you can do it. Not whether the math works out. I already know you know the math. I want to know if you believe you can make that shot. She thought about that for a long time. I need to be at the position before dawn, she finally said. I need a full hour minimum to establish the scope data from the actual location. The satellite imagery won't be precise enough for corrections at that range. Vaughn nodded. You'll have 2.5 hours. I need a spotter. Akefer goes with you. She thought again. The ammunition. I need to know the exact lot number on the rounds I'll be using. Velocity variation between lots at this range will cause a missed shot. Vaughn reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. He handed it to her. It was already the ammunition specification sheet for the specific lot they would be using. He had anticipated the question. She looked at him. He had already thought through every logistical concern before he came to her. He had been planning this since before he walked into the armory. The only thing he had not known was whether she would say yes. One more thing, she said. If I miss, and I mean if the shot does not land, we abort. We do not attempt a second round. At that distance, if the first shot misses, the sound of it will reach the target position in about 11 seconds. That is not enough time to cycle and correct before he moves. Agreed, Vaughn said. One shot, that was all she had. The drive north was done at night, in 2 unmarked vehicles with no headlights after they left the main road. Akefer sat beside her in the back seat and said almost nothing. He was not unfriendly. He had stopped being skeptical after the range session the morning before, but he was focused. He was already doing his job, watching the terrain, reading the landscape. Myra held the rifle across her knees and felt the road vibrate through the chassis and thought about her father. She thought about that first morning he had handed her a rifle. She was 8 years old. He was crouching next to her, saying, "Don't rush it. The target will wait. Your breath won't." She had thought it was simple advice. She had not understood until much later that it was the most important thing anyone had ever told her. They reached the outcrop at 3:45 in the morning. The night was cold and very clear. The stars above the plateau were thick and low and bright in a way that only happens at high altitude, far from any city. Myra climbed out of the vehicle and looked north across the valley. The ridge was invisible in the darkness, but she knew it was there. She could feel the distance of it. Akefer sat up beside her without being asked. He unpacked his spotting scope. He began reading the wind conditions at 3 different points along the valley using microenvironmental indicators. The way dry grass moved, the drift of dust along the rocky floor, the behavior of the cold air coming down off the ridge. Myra lay down behind the rifle and began her calculations. She had 2.5 hours. She used all of them. At 5:47 in the morning, the sky above the eastern ridge began to lighten. It happened slowly, first a dark blue, then a kind of deep charcoal that was not quite gray, then the first trace of orange along the top of the horizon. Myra watched it and did not move. She had been in position for over 2 hours. Her body ached from the cold and from holding the same posture for so long, but she had trained herself years ago not to acknowledge physical discomfort when she was focused. The ache was simply information that she filed away and ignored. Akafor was 3 feet to her right, behind his spotting scope, his voice a low, steady murmur as he continued reporting on the wind. It was calmer now than it had been in the early morning hours. The valley had its own weather system, cold air pooling at the bottom overnight, then slowly warming and shifting as the sun came up. This was the one window, Akafor had told her an hour ago, when the valley floor wind would be at its most stable. It would last maybe 20 minutes. After that, the thermal shift would begin, and the crosswind patterns would become much less predictable. 20 minutes. The ridge was visible now in the growing light. She could see it through the scope, a long dark line of rock against the sky, its surface broken and irregular. She had identified the specific section 3 hours ago, during the pre-dawn darkness, using the satellite imagery cross-referenced with the topography. She had locked in her scope adjustments for that exact point. Now she watched it. "Wind reading," she said quietly. 7 kilometers per hour, bearing 275, Akafor said. "Consistent, gusting marginally at the valley center, but I'm not seeing pattern variation." She incorporated the number. At 3,847 meters, a 7-kilometer crosswind would push the bullet approximately 2.5 meters off target if uncorrected. She had already dialed that in. She confirmed the setting one more time. Her elevation correction was 38.4 milliradians. That meant the rifle was aimed at a point nearly 94 meters above the target's actual position, accounting for the gravitational drop of the bullet over that distance. The bullet would fly upward, slow, arc over like a long throw, and fall into the target zone. It was less like shooting and more like lobbing, except that precision had to be absolute. She breathed. In, out. At 6:03, Akafor said, "Movement on the ridge." Myra's eye did not move from the scope. She had already been looking at that section of the ridge for the past 12 minutes. She saw it too, a shape, moving from behind a large rock formation, stepping forward into the open section. A person, standing upright. The figure was small at this range, in the scope, even at maximum magnification, it was a silhouette more than a person. But it was there. "Confirmed," she said. "Range confirmed at 3,847, Akafor said. "Wind holding. You have the window." She did not fire immediately. This was the part that most people would not understand. When the moment came, when the target was there, and the conditions were as good as they were going to get, the instinct was to act, to move quickly before the opportunity closed. Every trained response in the human body pushed toward action in that moment. But at this range, rushing the shot was the same as missing it. The margin for error at 3,847 meters was measured in millimeters. A fractional shift in her breathing at the moment of firing would move the bullet by meters at the target. She had to be past calm. She had to be beyond stillness. She had to be in a state that was almost the opposite of urgency. She let 2 full seconds pass after she had the shot. She felt her heartbeat. She found the space between beats, that half-second of absolute stillness when neither systole nor diastole was happening, when the body was momentarily at rest. That was the window inside the window. She applied pressure to the trigger. The rifle fired. The sound was enormous in the still morning air. She stayed on the scope, never flinch, never look away, always follow through. The bullet was in the air. At the speed of a .338 lap you around, it would travel nearly 900 meters per second at the muzzle, but it would slow significantly over distance. At 3,847 meters, the flight time was going to be approximately 3.2 to 3.4 seconds. That was how long she had to wait. 3 seconds is a very long time when you are watching a scope and holding your breath. She counted without counting, she stayed still, she waited. Then Akafor made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. A short, sharp exhale that was not quite a breath and not quite a word, but that carried, unmistakably, the weight of confirmation. "Hit," he said. The word was flat and simple, and it landed in the cold morning air like something she had been carrying for a long time being finally set down. She did not move from the scope for another 4 seconds, watching, confirming, making sure. Then she slowly released the tension from her body. Her hands, which had been so perfectly still, allowed themselves to tremble slightly, just for a moment. A release valve. She looked up from the scope and looked at Akafor. He was looking back at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. It was not celebration. They were both too professional for that. It was something quieter and more serious, something like recognition. 3,847 meters, he said. First round. She nodded once. They packed up immediately. The protocol was clear. After a confirmed shot, you did not stay in position. She had the rifle broken down and stowed in under 3 minutes. Akafor had the spotting equipment packed in 2. They moved back to the vehicle through the rocky terrain, low and fast, without speaking. In the vehicle, as the driver began moving south, Akafor turned to look at her. He was quiet for a moment, as if he was deciding something. "I've been doing this for 11 years, he said. "I've been spotting for 6 of the best long-range shooters in the army." He paused. "I have never seen anything like that." Myra looked out the window at the plateau, moving past in the growing morning light. She thought about the armory, the cleaning cloths and the solvent smell, and the rows of rifles waiting for other hands to carry them into the field. She thought about 7 years of that. 7 years of being very, very good at something that was supposed to be invisible. She said nothing, but something inside her, something that had been quietly coiled for a very long time, had finally come loose. When they got back to the base, nobody was waiting for them. That was not unusual. Field operations did not come with welcome parties. The base operated the same way it always did, vehicles moving, people walking between buildings, the ordinary machinery of a forward post grinding along. Myra climbed out of the vehicle and carried the rifle back toward the armory, the same direction she had always walked, the same familiar path. But something was different. She could feel it in herself. Something fundamental had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet and permanent rearrangement, the way a room looks different after you move one piece of furniture and suddenly everything else makes more sense. Vaughn was waiting for her inside the armory. He was standing exactly where he had been 2 days ago when he first came to watch her work, same spot, same posture. But his expression was different now. He looked at her with something she could only describe as a kind of satisfaction. Not pride, exactly. It was too reserved for pride. More like the look of a man who had made a judgment call and been proven correct, and who took quiet professional pleasure in that confirmation. She set the rifle down on the workbench and began breaking it down for cleaning. He watched her for a moment, then he spoke. "You know what the strangest part of this is," he said. She continued working. "What?" "You came back here to clean the rifle." She paused, looked at the parts in her hands, then she kept working. "It needs to be cleaned." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The shot is being written up. Official confirmation came in an hour ago. 3,847 meters, first round, field conditions." He paused. "That number is going to mean something. In a few days, it's going to mean something to a lot of people." She did not stop working. "I've already started the paperwork to have your assignment reconsidered," Vaughn said. "It won't be fast, nothing in this system is fast, but it will happen. You are not going to spend the rest of your career in here." She looked up at him then. Not with excitement, she had not allowed herself to feel what this meant yet, not fully. She had been keeping it at a careful distance, the way you keep a fire at a distance when you are not yet sure of it. But she looked at him directly and she said, "Why did you come looking for me? Really? How did you even know?" Vaughn was quiet for a moment. He looked at the weapon on the bench, then back at her. I read your personnel file 6 months ago, he said. Accident. I was looking for someone else, same last name, different base, and I saw yours instead. It had your qualification scores from when you enlisted, your marksmanship numbers. He paused. I've been in this business for 23 years. I have seen a lot of qualification scores. Yours were the best I have ever read from an unsupported, untrained recruit. Not close to the best. The best. He let that sit. And then I saw where they put you. She said nothing. I came to the armory 2 months ago, he said, just to look. I watched you work for about 15 minutes and then I left without saying anything. I came back 3 more times. I had to be sure of what I was seeing. What were you seeing? She asked. Someone who understands a weapon the way a musician understands an instrument, he said. It's not a mechanical thing. It's not just knowledge, it's something else. I don't have a better word for it. She looked down at the parts in her hands. She thought about all the rifles she had cleaned over the years. Hundreds of them. Thousands, maybe. Each one with its own small characteristics. The way this barrel seated slightly tighter than the spec recommended. The way that trigger spring had just a fraction more tension. She had felt all of it. She had always felt all of it. She had just never been given a reason to say so. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of that morning came slowly and then all at once. The confirmed distance, officially recorded and submitted up the chain, drew attention that Myra had not anticipated and was not entirely comfortable with. Vaughn had told her the number would mean something. He had been understating it. The shot landed her in a review process she had not asked for but could not stop. Brecht, who had originally been skeptical, was now the one pushing most forcefully for her immediate transfer into the long-range program. Akeffer had already written an independent account of the mission for the record. Vaughn was patient and methodical and moved the paperwork through the system the way he moved through everything, without urgency, without waste, without stopping. 3 months after that morning on the plateau, Myra Hale received new orders. She was being transferred to an advanced marksmanship program, one that most applicants trained for years to qualify for and still did not get in. She was not being placed at the entry level. The program's director, after reviewing the mission file and Akeffer's account and Vaughn's assessment and her own qualification history, had decided to place her in the advanced track. She would be working with the best long-range shooters in the military's arsenal. She read the orders sitting on the edge of her bunk in the same barracks where she had spent 7 years. She read them twice. Then she folded the paper very carefully and set it on her knee and sat there for a while. She thought about her father. She thought about cold mornings in Montana and a tin can at 300 meters and a man crouching beside her saying, "Don't rush it. The target will wait. Your breath won't." She thought about 7 years of cleaning weapons. 7 years of running her hands over something she understood completely and never being allowed to show anyone what that understanding actually meant. She thought about how close she had come to spending her entire career that way, to retiring from a room full of guns she had never fired in the direction she was meant to fire them. And she thought about a cold morning on a plateau, a ridge barely visible across a valley that was nearly 4 kilometers wide, and a single shot that took 3.3 seconds to find its mark. One shot. That was all it had taken to change everything. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the barracks and did not look back at the armory as she passed it, not because it did not matter to her, but because what it had given her was already inside her, already part of what she carried. The years in that room had made her what she was. She understood that now in a way she had not before. The patience, the precision, the way she could hold completely still when everything around her was moving. None of that had come from nowhere. It had been built slowly in a quiet room, with a cleaning cloth in her hands and a rifle that was waiting for someone else. She had been that someone else all along. She just had to wait for someone to look.